Have you ever wondered how a map drawn by a 16th century admiral could show the edge of a continent no one had yet seen? The ink has faded, but the lines still trace an impossible truth. A coastline free of ice, shaped like the one we now call Antarctica.
Beneath its faded script, there is a memory older than the paper itself.
So before you sink too deep into comfort, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you truly enjoy what we explore here.
The Piri Reis Map, drawn in 1513 by an Ottoman admiral, should not exist as it does. Its curves trait the western coast of Africa, the eastern line of South America, and, strangely, the northern rim of a land buried under 2 miles of ice.
When modern scientists compared those shapes to 20th century seismic data, the match was unsettlingly precise.
Yet, in Piri Reis' time, Antarctica had not even been discovered. How could the admiral draw what his eyes had never seen? Some say he copied older sources, fragments of forgotten charts handed down from civilizations that once knew the whole world. Piri Reis himself claimed his data came from ancient maps from the time of Alexander. But Alexander never sailed beyond Egypt.
Others whisper that his sources predated Greece entirely, that they were relics of an age when the poles lay in different places.
To understand this riddle, one must remember that ice is not eternal. It drifts, melts, reforms.
And the land beneath it, silent and unseen, remembers shapes long erased.
In the night, explorers found a mountainous continent with valleys and riverbeds, features too specific to be imagined. The coastline beneath the ice fit the Piri Reis outline almost perfectly.
Scientists called it coincidence or clever guesswork. But coincidence does not usually draw rivers under glaciers.
If the map is genuine, its accuracy demands an impossible conclusion.
That was the original thousands of years before recorded civilization. It would mean that the shape of our planet was known and then forgotten, buried not only by ice, but consider what that implies. A civilization capable of global navigation existing long before Sumer, Egypt, or Greece.
A culture erased so thoroughly that only a trace remained in a sailor's copied parchment.
Could that trace belong to the same world Plato described? Atlantis. If Atlantis was not a myth of the sea, but of the pole, then its drowning might not have been by water.
Yet every answer collapses into another layer of uncertainty.
Scholars have argued that the southern land on Piri Reis' map might simply be a distorted area stretched by projection.
Others point to the Oronteus Finaeus map, drawn a century later, showing Antarctica's rivers flowing freely. Were all these cartographers mistaken in the same way? Or did they copy something they could not understand? Perhaps that is the deeper question. Not who drew the map, but why such knowledge was allowed to fade. When we look at the Piri Reis map, we're not just seeing an old chart. We're staring into a mirror that reflects our own amnesia.
Yet every contour still whispers of a world without ice. A world that should not exist, and yet perhaps once did.
If that forgotten world truly breathed beneath the same sky we now see, what remains of it now? are its ruins resting under 2 miles of frozen silence, waiting for a thaw.
Or was the map merely a message left for us by those who once watched the Earth change shape and tried to warn us that it would again?
Somewhere under that endless white, rivers still carve paths through darkness unseen for millions of years.
Maybe they flow past mountains that once held cities, temples, or only the ghosts of them.
No one knows. No one dares to say. And as the snow falls in endless circles,
If a map can remember what the world has forgotten, then what else might the ice still be hiding? Long before the first ship reached the frozen south, the ice was already alive. Not merely as frozen water, but as the memory of the planet itself. Layers of snowfall compacted over
The warmth and the cold, the death of forests, the rise of oceans. Each layer tells a secret.
And when scientists pierced the Antarctic sheet to read its story, they found something that should not have been there.
A warmth too old, too human. Deep in the eastern Antarctic plateau, ice cores within them, traces of carbon, dust, and pollen whispered of a time when the continent was not a grave of frost, but a landscape of rain.
The data suggested that Antarctica had been warm enough to support plants, rivers, even forests, not tens of millions of years ago,
but in cycles that returned again and again, like the pulse of a sleeping heart.
If the ice remembers, then what did it once see? Could there have been an age when the southern pole was green?
A world of light, before the tilt of the earth condemned it to darkness.
It is easy to think of climate as static, as the slow turning of seasons. But the planet moves in ways that human memory cannot follow. Its poles wander, its crust breathes, its oceans rise and fall like lungs.
some researchers have dared to suggest that a sudden shift, a crustal displacement, as Charles Hapgood once called it, moving continents in a single cataclysmic gesture. Albert Einstein himself once entertained the idea that the weight of the polar ice could unbalance the planet's outer shell, sliding it over its molten core. If such a thing ever happened, then the place we now call Antarctica might once have rested thousands of miles closer to the equator. It would not have been a frozen wasteland, but a lush and living land, a cradle, not a tomb.
Imagine what it would mean if that theory were true. Civilization could rise and fall without leaving a trace.
Buried not by conquest, but by temperature, sealed under miles of shifting crystal.
If an ancient people once walked those valleys, their monuments would now lie impressed into the bedrock beneath the ice. The oldest libraries, the earliest temples, the first echoes of language, all locked in a vault of cold silence.
Perhaps the Earth itself decided to forget them.
But beneath the calm surface of accepted history, something unsettles the linear dream. Archaeologists find patterns too advanced, artifacts too old, myths too consistent to dismiss as coincidence.
Each clue feels like a breath through the ice, a whisper from before. Satellite imagery has shown vast subglacial
Features hidden beneath 2 miles of solid ice. The radar echoes draw the outlines of a continent once alive, carved by liquid water.
The Gamburtsev Mountains, for instance, stretch across a distance equal to the Alps, a complete, unexplained range buried in silence.
No one knows how such structures could have formed beneath a cap so old. Perhaps they predate the ice entirely.
Remnants of a world that never had the chance to be remembered.
And then there are the faint magnetic anomalies. Fields that twist and flicker beneath the surface as though shaped by more than stone.
Some scientists attribute them to variations in iron deposits. Others notice that the patterns align in geometric regularities too deliberate to be chance.
Could these distortions mark the ruins of something vast, not natural but constructed?
When we look at Antarctica, we do not just see cold. We see amnesia made visible.
Every layer of snow that falls is another veil drawn over the face of time.
Yet the deeper we drill, the older the truth becomes, until it ceases to be history and becomes myth once more. The boundary between science and memory blurs, just as the boundary between land and ice dissolves.
There is another mystery. Beneath the Ross ice shelf, sensors have recorded echoes of liquid water moving beneath the frozen crust.
Not in isolated pools, but in channels. Rivers running through darkness, hidden from the sun for perhaps 1 million years.
What do those rivers touch? Stone? Sediment? Or the remnants of something we cannot yet name?
In the 1990s, drilling near Lake Vostok revealed microorganisms preserved in subglacial lakes that had never seen the surface.
They were alive, alien in a way, yet native to Earth. If life can endure there in a world, fossilized spores, the bones of a lost species, the relics of hands that once built beneath an open sky. The questions pile like snow, each one burying the last, and through it, all the ice watches. It listens to the shifting of the planet, the hum of our machines, the distant murmur of the sea.
It holds within its frozen chambers the breath of ages, air exhaled by creatures we will never know.
It keeps the carbon of ancient fires, the dust of vanished storms. If there were cities beneath it,
Perhaps when the next warm age comes, the ice will release what it has held. The rivers will flow again, washing away eons of silence.
Maybe the first stones will emerge, smooth and undecipherable, their builders long erased.
And once again, humanity will invent new myths to explain them, because we have never learned how to face the idea that we are not the first to awaken.
Every melt reveals, but it also erases.
The ancient warmth found in the cores might be returning, the cycle repeating itself as before.
And somewhere beneath, the earth dreams of what it used to be. Green, sunlit.
If Antarctica was once alive, and if memory itself can freeze.
Yet his words have haunted the world like a riddle whispered through stone. In his dialogues, Timaeus, he described an island empire larger than Libya and Asia combined, lying beyond the pillars of Heracles. It was a civilization of perfect order and terrifying pride, and in a single night, he said, it vanished beneath the sea.
To most readers, Atlantis is only a parable. But what if Plato was not inventing, but remembering?
Scholars have debated for centuries where he found his tale. He claimed it came from the Egyptian priests of Sais, who told the story to Solon.
They said the story was written in their temple walls, in hieroglyphs no Greek could read.
Solon returned to Athens and passed it down through his family line until Plato turned it into philosophy.
But the Egyptians said something more. That the disaster had occurred 9,000 years before their time. 9,000 years.
That places Atlantis not in the age of myth, but at the end of the last ice age. It is an impossible coincidence.
9,000 years before Solon, the planet warmed, glaciers collapsed, and sea levels rose more than 100 meters.
What if Plato's island that sank was not destroyed by a flood, but buried beneath the cold breath of a new age? If the Earth's crust truly shifted, as Hapgood proposed, then the geography of Plato's world would have looked entirely different.
The island beyond the pillars could have been an entire continent, one that later drifted south, crossing the...
In that view, the ocean that swallowed Atlantis was not made of water at all, but of ice.
Plato described Atlantis as a land of concentric circles, alternating rings of land and water, all centered around a shining capital.
When scientists mapped the subglacial topography,
Coincidence, perhaps. But coincidences have a strange persistence when they concern the forgotten.
Across the millennia, fragments of the same story echo from culture to culture.
The Egyptians spoke of Zep Tepi, the first time when gods walked among men before the world was remade by flood.
The Mesopotamians told of Eridu, the city of beginnings, destroyed and rebuilt after the waters rose.
The Greeks remembered an island beyond the horizon that vanished in a single night. And in the Andes, long before the conquistadors, people told of Viracocha, a god who came from... Why do so many myths look toward the pole?
When early explorers reached Antarctica's edge, they did not find gods, only silence.
But silence can be deceptive. Beneath that emptiness lies a continent large enough to hold every empire humanity has ever built.
If Plato's Atlantis exists there, its ruins would be unreachable, sealed by glaciers thicker than mountains. Only in recent decades has radar and satellite imaging begun to reveal the terrain below. Mountains, valleys.
Some researchers quietly working outside the margins of orthodox science have noted geometric regularities within those radar maps.
Right angles, symmetrical ridges, and buried pyramidal forms beneath the Queen Maud Land region. They are cautious, as any rational mind would be, but the shapes remain. If natural, they are strange. If artificial, they are history's deepest burial.
Still, Plato's tale was never meant to be read literally, or was it? He insisted that the story was true, that he had not invented it.
He even began Critias with a kind of warning that the tale may seem incredible, but it had been recorded by those who saw with their own eyes.
A sham! Why would a philosopher careful in logic and allegory risk his reputation by calling fiction a fact? Consider the time in which he lived, an age already haunted by loss. The Bronze Age collapsed.
Plato looked backward and saw fragments of a world that seemed more advanced than his own.
The Atlanteans, he said, possessed ships, palaces, and metals unknown to the early Greeks. He called them arrogant, but he also described their mastery of geometry, astronomy, and hydraulics.
A civilization capable of global influence and of self-destruction.
It is easy to dismiss this as myth, yet our species has always buried truth inside metaphor.
every legend begins as memory, then fades into poetry.
Perhaps Plato's Atlantis was the fossil of a memory so old that only story could preserve it.
Perhaps he spoke of a real culture wiped away when the earth shifted its breath and the ice closed over the last doorway to the south.
When modern scholars calculate the dates of the ice expansion, when they map the subglacial mountains, when they find fossilized forests and riverbeds beneath the snow, they are, without realizing it, reading the same story Plato wrote, not in Greek, but in the language of geology.
The continents move, the seas rise, and civilizations vanish.
Only the earth remembers, and even its memory is slow to thaw.
And so the philosopher's warning echoes through time.
The world, he said, has ended many times before, and will again. Perhaps that was the real lesson of Atlantis. Not arrogance, but impermanence. Still,
A whisper lingers beneath his words. What if he was not warning us about ourselves, but
Something that survived under another sky, another sun, another axis. Could Atlantis still exist? Not in the sea, but beneath the oldest ice on Earth.
The answer is buried, deeper than reason can reach.
The philosopher's ink has dried. The ice has not.
And as we dream of lost cities and vanished maps, one question drifts across the century.
If Plato was remembering, then who was he remembering for? When scientists first sent seismic pulses through the frozen crust, they expected the usual reflections of rock and void.
Some of those echoes, they said, came from depths no human instrument had ever mapped before. Mountains taller than the Alps, valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, and vast lakes sealed away for millions of years. Lake Vostok, the largest of them, stretches for more than 250 kilometers beneath the surface. Its waters are liquid, kept warm by pressure and the slow heat of the Earth.
Yet, when a Russian team drilled into it in 2012, they discovered traces of microbial life, something that had survived in total isolation.
That life was not alien, but it was ancient, adapted to a place no other ecosystem could endure.
If such life can persist in that abyss of cold, what else could remain? When the radar pulses struck the subglacial mountains known as the Gamburtsev Range, the reflections revealed patterns not entirely natural. Ridges aligned in symmetry, sharp angles where erosion should have rounded stone. Geologists called them coincidental geometries. But even coincidence has its limits. Some saw in those lines the faint hint of walls, terraces, or foundations swallowed by time. In the 1970s, as satellite imaging improved, technicians noticed anomalies near Princess Elizabeth Land.
They could not be volcanic. There were no vents in that region.
The explanation vanished into classified reports. Years later, leaked documents described subglacial. Officially, the data was inconclusive. Unofficially, it was never mentioned again.
It is difficult to imagine the scale of what lies below. The Antarctic ice sheet is not uniform. It shifts.
Beneath those cracks, gravity scans show strange densities, voids that could be natural caves or something carved. The continent is laced with tunnels of water, some as wide as rivers flowing unseen toward the sea.
If one follows those channels deep enough, what landscapes might open in the darkness?
In 2018, NASA's Operation Icebridge mission recorded radar patterns beneath the...
Some geophysicists suggested it was the scar of a meteorite impact, perhaps linked to one of Earth's mass extinctions. Are now distorted by glacial pressure. The official explanation remained cautious, but the idea of a hidden void persisted.
Those who dream of lost civilizations point to these anomalies as whispers of the past.
They imagine the last outpost of a people driven south by flood or fire, retreating to a land that would soon become their tomb.
They picture temples encased in crystal, pyramids bent under the weight of ice, inscriptions sealed beneath translucent walls.
Most of science laughs at this, but even the laughter has softened over time.
For every century that passes, the boundary between myth and geology shifts a little closer. There are stories from the earliest explorers, too. In the 1940s, during Admiral Richard Byrd's Operation High Jump,
American pilots reported seeing mountain peaks in circular formation, rising through the clouds like the edges of an ancient citadel. Others claimed to glimpse vast ice-free valleys, strangely symmetrical, before the mist swallowed them again.
official logs record nothing but fog and snowstorms. Yet the idea persists that beneath those storms there are echoes of something that once had form.
The human mind is tuned to recognize patterns, even when none exist.
Perhaps these shapes, the perfect ridges, the circles, the voids, are only the mind's longing for order reflected through ice.
But what if the longing is justified? If the continents have truly shifted? If the world once turned...
The ice itself is not silent. It cracks, hums, and fractures.
Sometimes deep frequency sensors record vibrations that resemble rhythmic pulses, as though something far below is still moving.
Geologists attribute them to melting pressure or tectonic shifts. Yet their cadence is haunting, too.
In those vibrations lies a kind of voice, not human, but geological.
The Earth speaks in pressure and resonance, and those who listen hear more than they can explain.
When we send sound into the ice, it returns with fragments of its own story, as if the planet is whispering of what it once carried.
Perhaps that is what Plato meant when he wrote that Atlantis sank in a single day and night. Not a literal drowning, but an immersion in silence.
The ice would have devoured every texture, smoothing the world into abstraction.
What remains beneath is both everywhere and nowhere, like memory after waking.
Layers upon layers of compressed experience, each preserving a different era.
To melt it is to remember, yet memory is dangerous. What happens if the ice reveals something
Will we dismiss it as we have so many times before? Or will we finally listen to the echoes?
No one knows what the ice hides, only that it is vast enough to hold everything we have ever imagined, and perhaps something more.
The signals that return from its depths are never complete. They come back. Maybe that is what Atlantis has become. Not a city, not a continent, but a sound.
And if that sound is still traveling upward through 4 kilometers of frozen sleep,
Will we recognize its voice when it finally breaks the surface?
No ancient world should have been able to map a continent they could not see.
No ancient world should have been able to map a continent they could not see. Yet somehow, fragments of those forgotten
and guarded like talismans across empires that rose and fell. The Piri Reis chart was only the beginning.
There were others scattered across the libraries of Europe. The Oronteus Finaeus map of 1531, the Bois that placed an enormous southern landmass where no ship had yet sailed. Each seemed to whisper the same impossible secret,
that someone somewhere once knew the true shape of Antarctica before the ice. The Oronteus Finaeus map is the strangest of all. It shows rivers flowing across what should be a dead continent, mountain chains curling like frozen veins, and a coastline free of ice.
The detail is unsettlingly precise.
bays where modern satellites later found subglacial inlets.
How could a Renaissance cartographer, drawing from second-hand rumors, trace something that accurate?
He claimed his source came from very ancient sea charts inherited from older times, preserved by sailors long gone.
It was as if the memory of a vanished world had passed through ink and parchment, surviving only by chance.
Charles Hapgood in the 1950s tried to make sense of this riddle. His theory of Earth-shifting crust proposed
dragging continents to new latitudes in a single catastrophic motion.
If that are true, then what is now Antarctica might once have been closer to the tropics.
Einstein himself wrote a letter supporting Hapgood's logic, calling it a possible explanation of many geological puzzles.
But the scientific world dismissed it, not because it lacked imagination, but because it lacked proof.
Headsets. The idea of the planet's skin moving like a loose coat unsettled the tidy order of modern geology. They are not theories, but objects drawn by hands we can trace.
The Oronteus Finaeus map was presented to the French king. Mercator's world projection shaped navigation for centuries. If their southern landmasses were simply guesswork, why do they align so neatly with the radar outlines beneath the ice?
Coincidence bends under the weight of repetition.
Mercator himself hinted at something deeper. In a letter from 1577, he described an ancient source known to...
He believed that remnants of it had survived through Arab geographers passed into Europe after the fall of Constantinople. The notion suggests a lineage of forbidden geography, knowledge preserved through dark centuries, copied in secret.
Each generation forgetting a little more of its meaning.
If that chain is real, then our maps are not purely inventions of the modern age.
Philippe Boischa's map, drawn 2 centuries later, divided the Antarctic landmass into 2 parts, separated by a broad channel.
Exactly as radar would confirm in the 1950s, revealing East and West Antarctica split by the Transantarctic Mountains.
Boische could not have known this. His map predates any Antarctic exploration. He described his work as a reconstruction based on ancient data.
Those words, so calmly written, hold the weight of an unspoken inheritance.
Perhaps the most haunting pattern among all these charts is not what they show, but what they omit. Each bears empty zones.
Regions carefully left blank, as though the cartographers were obeying an older silence. Some coastlines fade mid-stroke.
Others stop at invisible borders like sentences missing their last word. Were those omissions due to ignorance or to reverence?
We imagine the past as primitive, yet our ancestors navigated by stars we barely notice now.
The builders of the Great Pyramid oriented it to true north, with precision rivaling modern instruments. If they understood geometry so well, could they not have drawn the Earth?
If their descendants inherited fragments of such maps, the Renaissance cartographers might merely have traced what was already ancient.
But history rarely tolerates anomalies. Institutions thrive on continuity. Lost worlds do not fit well within curricula.
When Hapgood presented his findings to academia, they thanked him politely and changed the subject.
When explorers found hints of subglacial mountains, they filed the data away.
To admit the possibility of forgotten geographies would mean rewriting the origin story of civilization itself. And so the maps remain curiosities framed in museums, admired but never believed.
Ignorant, yet the human eye cannot unsee. Once you compare the Oronteus Finaeus coastline to modern topography,
the resemblance is too exact. It feels less like chance and more like a memory resurfacing through ice.
Maybe those maps were not made for us, but by us, remnants from an earlier cycle of humanity, erased and reborn. In every ancient legend, there is mention of the world before the world. Sumerian kings reigned for thousands of years before the flood.
Egyptian priests spoke of dynasties ruled by gods before men. These are not isolated fantasies.
If all myths echo one truth, that something great existed before the great forgetting, then perhaps those forbidden geographies are the only surviving handwriting of that civilization.
Each map, each parchment, each line of faded ink becomes a message in a bottle, adrift across centuries.
We study them as historians, but maybe we should listen as archaeologists of memory.
As you imagine the explorers unrolling those ancient charts by candlelight, think of how the flames must...
Mountains erased, and seas still frozen in prophecy. Each stroke of the quill was an act of defiance against oblivion.
Perhaps that is why the maps were called forbidden, because they reminded us that knowledge is not linear. The same hand that once drew the world may yet draw it again when the ice retreats. And if those lines traced across fragile parchment are the only surviving memory of a vanished civilization, then
the next time you look at the map of the world, let your eyes drift south beyond the edge of what is known, into that pale blank where all stories end.
There, under the white silence, the lines are still waiting.
The earth does not stand still. Beneath its calm blue surface, to us it feels unchanging, but the ground is always moving, like a great animal breathing in its sleep. And sometimes, in rare intervals measured in eons, that breath becomes a convulsion.
Scientists call it geomagnetic reversal, the slow dance of the Earth's magnetic field, flipping from north to south and back again.
The record of those reversals lies written in lava flows and ocean sediments, a geological heartbeat spanning millions of years. But what if the poles shift more than magnetism? What if the crust itself moves, dragging continents into darkness and ice?
This is the theory that both fascinated and frightened those who dared to imagine a forgotten world, the magnetic exodus.
In Hapgood's hypothesis of crustal displacement, the outer shell of the Earth, the lithosphere, can shift suddenly over.
Such a movement, even of a few thousand miles, would alter climates overnight. A fertile land could become a tundra.
An ocean could swallow a city.
The poles would not freeze new ice. They would become ice.
And those who lived at the wrong latitude would never see another sunrise.
What force could move the entire crust at once? Hapgood suggested that the weight of the ice caps themselves might unbalance the planet. Evidence of sudden climate swings litters the geological record. Around 12,800 years ago, as the last ice age,
the Younger Dryas, a 1,000-year winter whose cause remains mysterious. The mammoths died, the great herds vanished.
Then, just as suddenly, warmth returned.
What happened?
A comet impact. Some say a shift in ocean currents. Others argue. But a few have whispered that the Earth itself moved. If the poles shifted then, even slightly, the equator would have changed, and with it, every climate zone on the planet.
A temperate paradise could have slid into the latitudes of endless night.
That date, roughly 12,000 years ago, matches almost perfectly with Plato's timeline for the fall of Atlantis.
Coincidence, or the shadow of the same event, described through myth.
The idea is seductive that a single planetary tremor erased not only species, but civilizations.
The mythologies of ancient peoples seem to remember such shifts. The Hopis speak of worlds destroyed by the great turning of the sky.
In Norse legend,
Ragnarok begins when the earth trembles and the stars fall from their places.
The Chinese tale of Gong Gong, the celestial serpent who struck the mountain that held up the heavens, tilting the sky and flooding the world.
Across continents, stories converge on the world spinning out one image.
Could these myths be the human echo of a real geological trauma? Perhaps our ancestors saw constellations change, seasons break,
and night fall where there had once been dawn. Perhaps they watched the sun's path twist across the horizon until their calendars failed.
To preserve that terror, they carved it into story, into ritual, into warnings, whispered from fire to fire.
In the 20th century, scientists studying the ocean floor discovered that the magnetic orientation of... Though these reversals took thousands of years, they hinted at the planet's capacity for transformation. Even now, the Earth's field is weakening. No one knows why.
If history is cyclical, another displacement may already be underway.
Imagine cities dissolving into dust as the crust grinds against itself. Mountain ranges rising overnight.
Humanity, so proud of its stability, would vanish into myth again, remembered only in fragments. Like those ancient cartographers who somehow mapped a different world. Perhaps they were the survivors of the last turning.
The keepers of memory from before the sky changed. In that light, the frozen South becomes more than a landscape. It becomes a monument to motion.
If Antarctica once lay farther north, it would have been free of ice.
When the crust shifted, it was carried into the polar night, entombing its forests, mountains, and if the legends are true, its cities.
That is the essence of the magnetic exodus, a migration not of people, but of the planet itself.
Modern science resists such sudden upheaval. It prefers slow change, gradual erosion, steady movement.
Yet nature rarely obeys our expectations. The fossil record shows bursts of extinction, layers of ash and mud marking moments when the Earth reset itself.
What we call stability may only be the pause between catastrophes. If such an event happened once, it could happen again. The ice at the poles grows heavier each year, pressing down upon the crust, creating stress lines invisible to us.
The magnetic field weakens. The climate shifts.
One day, perhaps suddenly, it will turn again. And when it does, what we call history.
The ancients may have known this cycle. Their monuments, the pyramids aligned with stars that no longer rise.
They may have mapped the heavens not for worship, but for survival, recording the positions of the sky before it shifted.
In their myths of floods and frozen lands, they encoded the memory of the magnetic exodus, the day the Earth forgot itself.
We too might be living at the edge of such a cycle, unaware of the slow tilt beneath our feet.
Perhaps that is why the old maps haunt us, because they belong to another orientation of the world, one that the Earth has already erased.
The compass, that fragile invention, points north, only because the planet allows it.
But if the poles wander even slightly, our navigation becomes meaningless.
When that moment comes, the continents will move again, and the ice will claim new ground.
The forgotten will be remembered, and the remembered will vanish.
The question is not whether the Earth has shifted, but whether we will notice when it does.
The coldest place on Earth once held forests. That is not metaphor or myth, but fact. buried in stone and frozen time. When the first cores of Antarctic rock were raised from beneath the ice, signed impressions of leaves, seeds, and even
fossilized wood, still aromatic when cut open, whispered of a world that no longer fits the imagination.
A land of green rivers and sunlight, where now only wind exists.
In the Transantarctic Mountains, beneath layers of permafrost, geologists have uncovered petrified forests.
They belong to a species that thrived 260 million years ago. Trees that rose and fell before mammals ever drew breath. Yet, it is not their age that disturbs, it is their position. These forests once grew near the South Pole.
At least for a time, the probably
Farther inland, at Mount Achernar, fossils of freshwater plants appear, suggesting the presence of streams and temperate lakes.
The record shows that warmth has returned more than once. Around 90 million years ago, during the Cretaceous, Antarctica.
Later, during the Eocene epoch, palm trees grew along its coasts.
Fossilized pollen from those palms has been found beneath the Lambert Glacier, under 4 kilometers of ice. How could such fragile life flourish there, unless the continent was once closer to the equator, or the planet itself was...
To understand what these fossils mean, imagine the world shifting not in years, but in breaths of deep time.
Carrying with their memories of lost climates. When they reach new positions, the memories freeze, sealed under sediment or snow.
The Antarctic fossils are more than remnants. They are time capsules of heat.
Each leaf imprint is a portrait of sunlight preserved by darkness.
Some researchers peering through microscopes at the cell structures of those ancient trees noticed something else. Traces of rapid volcanic ash in the same layers suggests a cataclysm.
Perhaps a sudden cooling. Perhaps something stranger. Could the final freeze have...
When modern satellites scan Antarctica's subsurface, they reveal not just fossils, but entire landscapes. Some of these lie under the West Antarctic ice sheet, which itself rests on land hundreds of meters below sea level.
If the ice melted, that region would not reveal mountains, but an inland sea. Perhaps once it was.
The notion that Antarctica was habitable, even briefly, carries echoes of the oldest myths. The Greeks spoke of Hyperborea, the land beyond the north wind, a paradise where night never fell.
The Andean legends told of Viracocha's shining kingdom in the far south, swallowed by storms.
The Egyptians, in some interpretations of their temple texts, referenced lands where the sun sleeps.
Different directions, same idea. A polar realm of forgotten warmth.
In 2017, researchers discovered fossilized roots beneath the ice shelf of Pine Island Bay.
The soil itself, preserved beneath the glacier, contained traces of organic carbon, hinting at a forest.
That age coincides with the final collapse of Antarctica's temperate climate. Something changed then.
Perhaps a drop in atmospheric carbon dioxide. Perhaps a realignment of continents that shifted ocean currents.
Whatever the cause, the warmth ended, and with it the last living forests of the South. Even today, the ice hides warmth beneath it. Volcanic heat seeps through cracks, feeding subglacial lakes that never freeze.
Microbes live in those lakes, sustained by minerals rather than sunlight, evolving in isolation for millions of years. In a sense, life in Antarctica never ended. It adapted, shrinking into invisibility. The ice did not destroy it. It buried it alive. If a civilization ever stood there, as some believe, it would have faced the same fate. Then years would pass, and the thaw would never return. Temples would crumble, rivers turn to glass, knowledge to silence.
Fossils of warmth would become fossils of memory, indistinguishable except to those who listen.
Modern science extracts these fossils carefully, cataloging, naming, classifying.
Yet every leaf they find is also a confession that the world changes faster, more violently, and more completely than we care to admit.
We are living in a pause between transformations. The ice we see today is not permanent.
It is only a temporary skin. Beneath it, the soil still remembers the scent of rain.
When the ice cores melt in laboratories, the trapped air whispers of long-lost summers.
Tiny bubbles expand and burst, releasing atmospheres older than humanity.
Some contain traces of greenhouse gases, others of volcanic ash. Together, they tell a cyclical tale.
Warming, freezing, awakening, forgetting.
The Earth does not destroy. It resets.
Each age inherits the ghost of the one before.
And perhaps we too are only another season in that rhythm, waiting to be fossilized by the next turn of ice.
When we look upon the frozen continent, we see the surface of the present.
But the fossils tell another true, that warmth lies beneath, and that what sleeps may one day...
If the ice ever retreats, and the forests awaken from their petrified slumber,
what else might awaken with them?
The ice is melting slowly, imperceptibly, yet undeniably. The white continent begins to breathe faint shades of blue where white once reigned. Slender cracks spreading like veins across the surface. But beneath that stillness, something vast is shifting. Antarctica is not dying. It is awakening.
and with each drop that falls, it reveals fragments of what was once hidden. As though the planet...
The 20th century treated the poles as borders, blank zones on the map, frozen guardians of the known world. But technology has erased their silence. NASA's Operation Icebridge, begun in 2009, sent the instruments pierced miles of ice and found what satellites could not. Valleys deeper than the Grand Canyon, mountains rivaling the Alps,
and voids so immense that they seem to mock imagination. Some of these voids, researchers admitted,
the greatest of them lies beneath the Denman Glacier, a canyon more than 3 kilometers deep. It runs for over 100 kilometers, carved into bedrock long before the ice covered it. No light has touched its floor in tens of millions of years. And yet within its depths, radar found patterns of reflection that flicker strangely, as if bouncing off surfaces smoother than stone.
The official reports call them anomalous echoes. The unofficial whispers call them architecture.
Elsewhere in the West Antarctic ice sheet, satellites have detected immense masses shifting beneath the surface.
Some suggest they are magma intrusions,
Others say mineral deposits, but the shapes, circular, symmetrical.
When viewed from above, they resemble the buried outlines of cities drowned in snow.
Still, the symmetry remains. As the ice thins, it begins to reveal color.
Researchers reported a discovery near the Thwaites Glacier. Sediments spoke of an ancient ecosystem. Roots
that mixed within the samples were structures they could not categorize. Tiny, regular forms under the microscope, neither mineral nor organic.
They might be crystallizations from pressure, or something far older, fossilized by processes we do not yet understand.
The melting reveals, but it also conceals. Every year, the continent loses an estimated 100.
Yet, the more it melts, the less we can preserve. The evidence dissolves with the mystery. By the time
there are regions that no one is allowed to visit. The Antarctic Treaty, signed in 1959, forbids.
But it also restricts access. Only a handful of zones are open to exploration. Others are marked as environmentally protected, yet few have seen them to verify why.
Satellite imagery of certain areas shows nothing but blurred whiteness, as though deliberately scrubbed.
Operation High Jump, launched in 1946 by Admiral Richard Byrd, remains a chapter of polar history wrapped in silence.
Officially, it was a scientific expedition. Unofficially, it was the largest military operation ever conducted.
It lasted only months before being abruptly terminated.
Byrd's later statements, vague and troubled, spoke of flying objects that could move from pole to pole in moments.
He was dismissed as poetic, perhaps unwell. But his diary, if authentic, tells of a... No evidence has ever been found, yet the rumor refuses to die. Whether these accounts are truth or... Geological surveys have revealed vast magnetic anomalies, regions where compasses falter, where instruments misread.
One such area lies near the Gemburtsev Mountains, another beneath the Wilkes Land crater.
Scientists attribute these to natural variations, but the patterns are eerily regular, geometric again, forming near-perfect circles.
As the poles warm, these anomalies become more accessible.
Research teams drilling for ice cores sometimes report
In some cases, the boreholes fill with water that should not exist at such depths.
The continent, frozen for eons, is beginning to breathe, and what it exhales is mystery.
The melting also reveals ancient microbes, viruses locked in ice for millions of years.
In 2020, scientists from Ohio State University thawed cores from Tibet's glaciers, cousins of Antarctica. Most were harmless, but their mere existence reminded us that the Earth stores more than fossils in its cold archives.
Biological echoes of a world that predated ours.
Every image sent back from satellites, every scan from radar feels like the peeling of a veil. But with each revelation comes unease.
The ice once served as a boundary, a barrier between the known and the forbidden. Now that boundary is dissolving.
And like all barriers that dissolve, it invites both wonder and fear.
Some say the melting is natural, others insist it is not. Climate change, industrial heat, cosmic cycles, all may be true at once.
Yet within that convergence, there is another possibility.
The return of a climate that once was, and may yet be again.
If Antarctica was once green, and if the Earth turns as it always has, then perhaps, as humanity worries over rising seas, perhaps we should ask a quieter question. What if
the sea is not reclaiming the world, but returning it?
Because when the last wall of ice falls away and the hidden valleys stand naked beneath the sky, the truth will no longer be speculation.
We will see what has waited there, patient, silent, untouched, and the world will never be able to forget again.
And when that happens, when the last mirror of ice breaks and reveals the face beneath,
will we recognize what looks back at us?
The men who first reached the end of the Earth did not find the emptiness they expected. They found mirrors instead, reflections of their...
In the early 20th century, the race to conquer Antarctica was not just a contest of exploration. It was a...
Their names echo through frost and tragedy, their journals soaked with cold and awe. When Roald Amundsen planted the Norwegian flag at the South Pole in December 1911, he described the landscape as a vast white nothing.
But explorers who came later, wandering along the transantarctic ridges, found patterns in the ice, formations of stone.
They were photographed, logged, and forgotten. The data was filed away in archives where questions were not welcome.
Ernest Shackleton's Endurance expedition in 1914 is remembered for its heroism, the ship crushed by ice, the miraculous survival of his men.
But there is another detail buried in his lesser-known notes. On one reconnaissance trek across the Weddell Sea region,
rhythmic and unbroken, like the turning of a giant wheel. Shackleton dismissed it as wind trapped in the glaciers, but the sound persisted for hours, pulsing beneath their feet.
Decades later, seismographs in the same region recorded a deep resonance from within the ice, identical in frequency.
Then was Admiral Richard Byard. His first flight over the South Pole in 1929.
His notes speak of mountain ranges in a perfect symmetry, of valleys too smooth to be natural,
and of a warm current of air rising where there should be none.
When he returned for Operation High Jump in 1946, the expedition scale was unprecedented.
It lasted barely 2 months before it was abruptly terminated. Officially, High Jump ended due to harsh weather and logistical problems. Unofficially, rumors began to swirl. Byrd's post-expedition interviews contain odd fragments.
He spoke of a new enemy capable of flight from pole to pole, and of a great unknown land beyond the ice.
His private diaries, if authentic, describe something stranger. A flight into a green valley beyond the mountain.
Historians dismiss this as a hoax or delusion. Yet even the myth carries weight. It suggests that Antarctica's silence hides.
The following decades deepen the mystery. During the Cold War, the continent became a stage for invisible exploration.
Aerial reconnaissance missions flew patterns over the same regions repeatedly, as though searching for something specific.
One declassified Soviet report from the 1960s mentions geophysical anomalies beneath the ice sheet of Queen Maud Land. Sources of heat and magnetism inconsistent with geology. The details are sparse, but the phrasing is unmistakable. Inconsistent.
The 1959 Antarctic Treaty froze all claims of sovereignty and forbade military activity.
Since then, only a handful of regions were made accessible without special clearance. The rest is restricted, locked under...
Scientists who work there speak in careful tones. Their research confined to climate, ice cores, and meteorology.
Yet, even in their data, anomalies appear. Unexplained heat fluxes, electromagnetic disturbances, and
Some explorers who have ventured beyond permitted zones report sensations difficult to describe. Compass needles spinning, static in their radios.
An oppressive silence broken by faint mechanical hums. Whether these are products of But every expedition returns changed. One geologist, after months at McMurdo Station, wrote in his...
We like to believe that exploration reveals, but in Antarctica, discovery often leads only to new forms of forgetting.
What remains feels curated, as though the continent itself decides what may be remembered.
Even today, the presence of military technology lingers under the guise of research. Satellites track thermal emissions in real time.
unmanned drones scan regions close to human travel. Some of the images they capture, strange circular...
Perhaps they are artifacts of processing. Perhaps not.
The polar night changes perception. Under months of darkness, the mind stretches thin. Explorers have written of seeing lights move beneath the ice. Faint green and gold ripples that travel against the current.
The algae are merely the substrate. Look as the energy organizes itself. These aren't random fluctuations.
One biologist wrote, "It was like watching a thought pass through water."
There are places on Earth where history feels heavy. Antarctica is the opposite. History feels...
A silence so vast it consumes all noise, even thought.
Perhaps that is why the explorers who went there became legends. They confronted not the unknown, but the absence of knowing.
And yet, in that emptiness, something watches back.
Satellite readings reveal faint traces of atmospheric gravity waves above certain glaciers, pulses of air pressure that rise from below.
If we listen closely, the silence of Antarctica hums with everything we have tried to forget.
The explorers who crossed its threshold may not have understood what they found, but they've understood what they found.
What did they truly see when they stared into that endless white?
Perhaps they did not discover Antarctica at all. Perhaps it discovered them.
Stories of a droned or frozen world echo across every ancient civilization, scattered like...
Yet beneath each myth is the same longing, the same unspoken grief for something lost.
The Egyptians spoke of a sacred age they called Zep Tepi, the first time when the gods walked.
The Sumerians wrote of kings who ruled for tens of thousands of years before the waters came.
The Andeans told of Viracocha, the shining teacher from the south, who brought order after the great darkness.
And in Polynesian legend, the ancestors sailed from a vanished homeland swallowed by waves. Different lands, different tongues, but the melody is the same. A memory of cataclysm and rebirth.
It is as if humanity, scattered by disaster, carried fragments of a single story across the earth.
The details warped with distance, but the refrain endured. Once there was a world of light, and it was taken by sea or ice. Modern anthropology treats such tales as metaphors, psychological reflections of seasonal floods, volcanic eruptions, or cultural trauma.
Yet myth often preserves what memory cannot. When archaeologists uncovered the ruins of Troy, they...
And so we must ask, could the stories of sunken lands and frozen cities conceal not fantasy?
Global flood myths number in the hundreds. In Mesopotamia's epic of Gilgamesh, the gods send deluge to cleanse the world.
In Genesis, the waters rise for 40 days and nights.
The Aztecs remember a time when the seas consumed the mountains, leaving only a few souls clinging to cypress trees.
The Hopi recall 4 previous worlds destroyed by fire, frost, and water.
The Dogon of West Africa tell of a cosmic ship that brought life after the great inundation.
Each narrative carries fragments of something older, perhaps not a single event, but a rhythm of destruction embedded in the planet's history.
When the last ice age ended around 12,000 years ago, sea levels rose more than 100 meters, drowning coastlines across every continent.
Entire regions that once teemed with life. The Sunda Shelf of Southeast Asia, Doggerland between Britain.
To those who lived there, it would have seemed as though the ocean had swallowed the world.
Plato's description of Atlantis fits eerily within that same window of time. His island was said to have fallen
at the very edge of the Younger Dryas when the planet's climate shifted violently. Glaciers melted, oceans surged, and temperatures...
To a people watching from the shore, it would have been the end of the world.
Some research Younger Dryas triggered by a comet impact, Luridea, Antarctica, and Europe.
Others think it was caused by massive freshwater outflows from collapsing ice sheets, disrupting ocean currents.
Civilizations, if any existed, would have been erased. Yet their stories, their grief...
In the temples of Egypt, priests spoke of a time when the Nile flowed differently, when the stars of Orion stood higher in the sky.
In Bolivia's highlands, the stones of Tiahuanaco show signs of water erosion far above any modern floodline.
In the ruins of Dwarka, off India's western coast, divers have found remnants of city walls and roads submerged 20 meters below the sea.
These discoveries do not prove Atlantis, but they whisper of forgotten chapters. The Earth's memory is imperfect, but persistent.
Even language preserves the echo. The root word for deluge in Menim's old...
The flood cleansed the world, and the survivors began again.
If we listen carefully, we can hear the same refrain in myths of fire and ice. The Norse Ragnarok.
The Maya spoke of eras destroyed by sun and storm. They remembered the warmth beneath the ice, the paradise entombed.
Civilizations rise, reach for the sky, and then vanish, leaving behind only symbols, stones, and stories.
Myth becomes the fossil of memory. They remind us that the boundary between civilization and oblivion is thinner than ice. That the world we stand upon has drowned before and will again. That memory itself is fragile, and that only myth endures long enough to become truth. Perhaps the stories of flood and ice are not warnings of the past, but premonitions of the future. For nearly 200,000 years, humans lived as scattered tribes. Then, without warning,
there are genetic traces, faint, persistent, that point to an origin story that is stranger than we admit.
In certain indigenous populations of South America and Australasia, scientists have found fragments of DNA that do not.
Some suggest that these genetic anomalies could be the legacy of an early migration from a southern homeland.
If a people had once thrived on a now frozen continent, where would their descendants go when the ice came? South America lies directly north of Antarctica.
Its Andean highlands mirror the shape of the southern mountains. It is not unthinkable that refugees of a dying land would have followed the winds north. Some of the artifacts show familiarity with ocean resources, as if their makers had long known the sea.
In Brazil, at Pedra Furada, evidence hints at human presence over 20,000 years old.
A language built for describing a landscape of melting and freezing.
Their myths speak of ancestors who followed the sun from a land of eternal light, forced north by the cold.
The sudden rise of agriculture, astronomy, and megalithic architecture across the world after 10,000 BCE. At Göbekli Tepe in Turkey, monoliths carved with animals and constellations appear millennia before writing.
As if built by those who already knew geometry in the sky. In Peru's Caral, pyramids and observatories rose nearly as early as the Egyptian Old Kingdom. Across oceans, cultures began to shape stone with uncanny precision, aligning their monuments to the solstices and the stars.
These were not isolated sparks of genius. They were scattered embers of the same fire.
The idea of a forgotten teacher race, not gods but survivors, is as old as civilization itself.
The Sumerians spoke of the Abgal, sages who emerged from the sea after the flood to teach humanity writing and law. The Egyptians told of Thoth, who brought the wisdom of the before time.
The Greeks had Prometheus, who gave men knowledge stolen from heaven.
And in the Andes, the legend of Viracocha returns, a bearded stranger in white,
Different names, same archetype, the memory of those who remembered.
Perhaps the myths are not about gods descending, but people returning.
Over generations, the survivors' science would blur into legend, their tools into relics, their memory into prayer.
Genetic evidence may yet hold the truth. Researchers studying the genome
but to populations in the South Pacific.
How could such a connection exist unless ancient seafarers had crossed the ocean thousands of years before Polynesia was even settled?
Some speculate that these were remnants of an older presence, a maritime civilization that vanished when the seas rose.
If their homeland had once been the southern continent, the Exodus would have scattered their blood across both hemispheres.
The human genome, like the ice, remembers. Within every cell lies the record of survival.
We study our DNA as though it were code, but it is closer to a map, tracing paths across forgotten oceans.
Maybe Atlantis was not a city of marble and gold, but a cradle of humanity's first renaissance.
A civilization erased but not forgotten, lingering in our blood, our languages, our dreams.
And as we gaze south toward that silent white horizon, we're looking not at the end of the Earth, but at our own beginning. Or are we merely repeating what they already knew, destined to forget once more when the next ice comes?
Every civilization is built not only on stone, but on silence. Beneath the stories
The more we build, the more we conceal. History, after all, is not a collection of facts.
When the age of discovery beckoned, Europe's explorers sailed into oceans that maps called empty.
The same blankness that once surrounded the southern continent. Here be dragons, the cartographers wrote.
Yet behind the bravado of conquest hid another agenda, to redraw the memory of the world.
The Vatican's influence stretched across these voyages, not only blessing ships, but dictating what the captains could reveal. The Church had long maintained an uneased truce with geography. It needed the world to be round enough for heaven. After all, if other continents existed, what did that mean for salvation? Were their souls beyond Christ's reach? When Columbus returned with rumors of another world, theologians debated whether the people he found were descendants of Noah or of some pre-Adamic race. The discovery of new lands was not just scientific, it was heretical, and so information was filtered, rewritten, or suppressed.
Among the most guarded secrets were maps, those dangerous documents that could challenge doctrine by simple geometry. The Piri Reis Map, already ancient in lineage, was quietly dismissed. Mercator's southern continent was folded into allegory.
Even as explorers skirted the edges of the Antarctic Circle, official records spoke only of storms and seaweed.
A blank space is safer than a contradiction.
In the 16th century, when scholars began translating forbidden manuscripts from the East, whispers emerged of older
charts of the world drawn long before Christ, showing coastlines and lands unseen by medieval eyes.
Access to the archives was and still is restricted. Even now, fewer than a dozen living scholars hold permission to enter without escort.
Inside, beneath frescoes of apostles, lies a labyrinth of more than 80 kilometers of
What do they contain? No one truly knows.
Some who have entered speak of ancient atlases from Alexandria, copied by monks after the Great Fire. Others mention documents labeled in Greek and Arabic, describing the southern continent as fertile and inhabited.
The official line insists that these are fables, but the secrecy surrounding them only deepens the suspicion.
That they preserve a geography older than scripture, a memory too inconvenient to canonize.
The Jesuit order, known for its intellect, played a silent role in shaping what we believe about the...
Many of the earliest polar measurements came from Jesuit observatories, yet their data was often censored before publication. Even Galileo's telescope had to bow to theology. If the Church could rewrite the cosmos, why not the map?
By the 17th century, when Mercator's successors began revising his projections, the mysterious Terra Australis.
The reason officially was lack of evidence. But perhaps it was something else. The need for erasure.
If older maps had shown a habitable Antarctica, it could not coexist with a doctrine that placed each...
Centuries later, during the Enlightenment, explorers began rediscovering what the ancients already seemed to know.
When Cook returned in 1775, his logs describing mild air and greenish waters near the Antarctic Peninsula were redacted.
The Church no longer ruled the seas, but its ghosts still lingered in every royal archive.
We think of censorship as crude, burning books, silencing voices, but its most powerful form is omission.
The Vatican did not need to destroy the maps of the Old World. It only needed to file them away where no one would look.
And so the greatest collection of pre-modern cartography remains under lock and key, guarded by men who...
In 2013, a rare document surfaced from a private estate in Portugal, a 1519 world...
It depicted a southern coastline, matching the shape of modern Antarctica, centuries before its discovery.
Scholars authenticated the parchment, but dismissed it as speculative geography.
That phrase, speculative geography, has long been the velvet glove of suppression. It allows the powerful to keep the impossible contained within the polite boundaries of curiosity.
The compass, too, became a weapon of silence. With it, explorers could navigate anywhere, but only within the world they were told existed.
To sail beyond the sanctioned edges of the map was to invite exile, excommunication, or disappearance. Many did. Few returned. Those who did spoke of lands that could not be published.
Coasts erased from official charts and orders to destroy their notes for the peace of the faithful.
It is tempting to view these stories as conspiracy, but history itself is a conspiracy of forgetting.
The Church was not alone in its concealment. Empires, too, learned the art of erasure. Knowledge one...
If ancient maps lie in Vatican vaults, their purpose may never have been deceit.
That civilizations rise and fall like tides. That our world has been drawn and redrawn countless times.
That God or nature does not fear revision.
Today we seek.
We live in a world still ruled by those invisible compasses, guiding us towards sanctioned truths and away from forbidden directions.
And as the ice continues to melt, one wonders, when the southern land finally reveal what lies...
Because if the maps beneath the Vatican do show a green Antarctica, then history, faith, and science will all have to admit the same impossible thing.
That the world we know is not the first.
Beneath the Antarctic sky, night and day blur into one long...
The world believes Antarctica belongs to science, but the machines buried beneath its snow hum with another purpose.
The modern age has turned exploration into surveillance. Satellites orbit the pole, mapping every ridge, every flicker of temperature.
Yet some readings defy explanation. Patches of heat under the ice, geometric voids where solid ground should be.
When the European Space Agency released gravitational data in 2018, geophysicists noticed something unsettling.
Nearly 500 kilometers across, dense enough to distort the planet's gravitational field.
It could be an asteroid impact basin, they said. Or perhaps something else.
At the same time, rumors began to circulate among contractors stationed at research facilities. Pilots spoke of restricted air corridors, zones where instruments failed and magnetic readings twisted. Some told of aircraft rerouted without explanation, of blacked-out coordinates and flight logs.
The official reason was always safety, but safety in the language of secrecy often means silence.
The U.S. base at McMurdo, officially a logistics hub, houses equipment that few outsiders understand.
South of it, near Dome C, sits Concordia Station. Officially, it monitors climate change. Unofficially,
the cables laid through tunnels under the ice are said to link directly to satellites orbiting far beyond Earth's atmosphere.
Some whisper of neutrino detectors, vast subterranean arrays that listen to the universe.
Yet some of its readings hinted at neutrinos arriving not from above, but from below, as if something inside the Earth were emitting them. Those references quietly vanished in later reports. If the ice hides more than geology, the technology above it may already know.
In 2016, a satellite known as GRACE detected fluctuations in Antarctica's gravity field.
The pattern did not match natural tectonics. A few researchers compared it to mechanical resonance.
The data was never publicly explained.
The fascination with Antarctica among the world's powers has only deepened. Nations that rarely agree on anything all maintain heavy infrastructure there.
Drones patrol its skies. Icebreakers linger near invisible borders.
And satellites circle like silent sentinels.
Official statements speak of cooperation and research, but the overlapping territories tell another story, each nation guarding a portion of the unknown.
In 2003, a group of researchers drilling near Lake Vostok claimed to have hit a metallic object 3,600 meters below the surface.
The borehole flooded and froze before they could continue.
The samples taken afterward showed traces of titanium and nickel, alloys uncommon in the surrounding rock.
The report was published, then swiftly retracted as measurement error. Those who worked on the project were reassigned, their names omitted from later acknowledgments.
Still, whispers persist.
Most are easily dismissed as pareidolia or manipulation. But one thing remains constant.
The feeling that something mechanical sleeps beneath the snow.
If ancient civilizations once existed there, could we now be standing on their ruins without realizing it?
And if the governments of the world know, why keep it secret? The answer may be simple or terrifying.
Knowledge of a pre-human technology would fracture every foundation of belief, religion, and power.
The existence of an intelligence older than ours would redefine history itself. Better, perhaps, to leave it under ice.
The machines we build now, the antennas, the sensors, may not be searching outward at all. They may be listening downward.
The signals they monitor, the pulses they chart, could be echoes from whatever sleeps below. The official data shows occasional noise events.
but no one outside the classified channels has ever seen the raw data.
In 2018, a satellite detected a sudden heat bloom beneath the Thwaites Glacier, far larger than geothermal.
For weeks, the anomaly persisted, then faded without trace. No follow-up expedition was allowed. To this day, the coordinates remain under restricted access, and still the machines continue to hum.
Scientists on the ice speak of nights when their instruments record signals no one ordered, transmissions looping from nowhere, data packets filled with static.
Once a technician left an audio monitor running overnight and captured a low, oscillating sound, pulsing like a heartbeat.
He joked, "It was the ice dreaming." He deleted the file the next day.
Perhaps the machines are not intrusions, but continuations. Perhaps we are unknowingly rebuilding what once...
The sensors, the antennas, the satellites, all listening to a signal older than humanity, waiting for its reply.
If we awaken what sleeps beneath, will it recognize us as its descendants or its replacements?
And when the first true signals will rise from the depths.
Pressed down by centuries until it hardens into crystal. Layer by layer, it records everything.
The breath of ancient forests, the smoke of forgotten fires, the chemistry of vanished seas.
Each depth is a different world. Each bubble of air a whisper from an age when the sky was another color. At 3,000 meters, nearly 4 kilometers of compression, the air that emerged from the melting core was 800,000 years old.
To hold it was to breathe the ghost of a world before humanity.
In those bubbles were traces of volcanic ash, methane, and pollen. Proof that Antarctica was once alive.
But what if those layers also contain something less measurable? Not the residue of climate, but the residue of civilization.
Ice, after all, preserves not only nature's signatures, but human ones. Soot, metal, radiation, even sound.
The densest layers act as a kind of crystal memory, capturing vibrations as subtle as heartbeats.
When researchers amplified recordings of seismic waves from certain Antarctic cores, they found faint rhythmic patterns pulsing at intervals that did not match tectonic activity.
Some dismissed it as instrumentation error. Others, more quietly, wondered if the ice itself might be resonant.
Perhaps the ice remembers more than it should. In its deepest layers, the pressure transforms.
The sound is eerie, harmonic, like the chime of glass underwater.
But standing above a borehole, hearing the earth sing, one cannot help but imagine the frozen...
Every civilization has searched for a way to defeat forgetting. The ancients carved in stone, the monks wrote. Each epoch leaves its fingerprint, not in monuments, but in the chemical balance of the air.
Within that logic, even an erased civilization would remain, but as ratios. If one looked carefully enough at the layers beneath the ice, perhaps one could read not just clusters. There have been anomalies. In one 1999 study, researchers analyzing a core from Dome Fuji.
The layer's age was ambiguous, roughly 13,000 years old, overlapping the younger Dryas boundary.
The unofficial one was never printed. A comet leaves glassy debris. This layer left magnetic ash.
In some layers, isotopic ratios fluctuate wildly, suggesting temperature swings that should have taken millennia, occurring in mere decades. To think of ice as a recording medium is to understand that nothing is truly lost.
In this sense, Antarctica is not a wasteland, but an archive, the largest and oldest on the...
When light passes through ancient ice, it bends, splitting into pale spectrums that shimmer like trapped dawns. They attribute them to refraction. Yet in their notebooks, one finds words not typical of science: haunting, presence, memory.
Perhaps it is the human mind reflecting itself against eternity.
But perhaps the ice is not entirely inert. Imagine time itself layered in crystal.
Every drilling expedition, every extraction of a core is a form of resurrection, waking the atmosphere of forgotten worlds.
What if somewhere deep within those cores lie not the mark of nature, but of intention?
In myth, the idea is not new. The Nordic sagas speak of Ymir, the giant of ice.
The Egyptians believed memory could be preserved in crystal. The Tibetans wrote of luminous stones that sang when touched.
Modern science treats such images as poetry, but even poetry can prefigure discovery.
When the ice becomes water, the archive becomes the world once more. The old air returns.
And perhaps within that cycle is the quiet logic of rebirth. Maybe history is not.
And when it melts, when that clarity flows back into our hands, we will finally see what we have always. That stillness hangs over Antarctica like a veil. Even in the modern age, with the continent that once swallowed empires and myths, now begins to uncover itself, shedding its shroud inch by inch. We are taught to believe that the future is a straight line. But Antarctica what we call discovery may simply be remembrance. Every new expedition feels less like As the ice melts, we stand on the threshold of revelation. It is as though the continent is...
The Earth remembers its cycles, even if we do not. Every 10 or 15,000 years, it shifts.
For the planet, it is only renewal. But renewal is not gentle. It scrapes away the old to make room for the next.
If the ice conceals the remnants of an earlier humanity, then perhaps their greatest message is not about technology, but humility. To know that others once walked this same earth, mastered it, and then were erased. The arrogance of
The audio is characterized by the sounds of a spacious, echoey museum environment.
Perhaps they will find our ruins beside the ruins of those who came before, entombed in the same ice, the same forgetting.
In this light, the myth of Atlantis becomes not tragedy, but prophecy. It tells us that every age believes.
The flood is always coming, and beneath each deluge something of us remains. A trace, a shape.
But the Earth has crossed and recrossed those thresholds countless times. Ice becomes water.
The difference now is that we're here to witness it, perhaps to understand it, perhaps to remember better than those before us.
If the ice truly hides an older world, its reemergence will not be an unveiling, but a mirror.
And when the last veil of snow dissolves, the image looking back will not be alien. It will be...
The melting of Antarctica is not only a geological event, it is a revelation written in slow motion.
It reminds us that the Earth's language is not written in words, but in temperature, pressure, and rhythm. And yet, we still treat the ice as an object, not a teacher. We measure it, drill into it. Remember, when the final sheets collapse and the black rock of the buried land stands exposed.
The answer will decide whether we become the next legend beneath the ice. Another cautionary tale told by...
For now, the stillness holds. The machinery of nations hums at the edges. But
and in that light, the world will remember what it forgot. The question is not what lies beneath the ice.